Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Wednesday, October 8th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee with JC Sherbert. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you all are having a wonderful week. It's Wednesday. That means on the Chief Sports Network, we have some pretty doggone good stuff going on. Tailgate Talks, the audio version is up on our YouTube channel. Steve Fink is the guest today. So that's a fantastic interview because Steve came in, gosh, when Eric Hyman got to South Carolina right after Steve Spurrier did. And he's been the SID at South Carolina for 20 years. And so he's seen a lot of the high moments and the low moments and all the stuff the good stuff, as we look back over the last couple of decades. And so a great episode up there. You can also hit their YouTube channel, Tailgate Talks 547. Use the @ also hit that subscribe button for them as they continue to grow their channel. And that's the unedited version right there on their YouTube channel. It's also on Gamecocks Plus, which has some good stuff about the 1984 Gamecocks. Gamecocks Plus for those that subscribe to that. The morning show will have Stephen Garcia, John Whittle on all things, and Rob Williams from SEC Sunday night as normal on Wednesdays. And then it's wide open Wednesday. That means you don't have to be a club chief member to get in the chat box. So the Mad Dog and I will be taking a bunch of questions throughout the day. We had a wide open Tuesday yesterday. It was a technical glitch, and then so we just kept it open. But if you'd like to join Club Chief, you can do that using your YouTube app on Apple, and you can also subscribe right here. It's $4.99 a month. You can talk with us each and every day and interact. Sports Talk with Phil Kornblut streams from 6 to 8, and then the late night Gamecock show with Matt Anderson and Alex Jones, taking you inside the numbers for this LSU South Carolina battle. So a very big day on Chief Sports. TheBigSpur.com, of course, will have the poll du jour and all the great content there. So check it out there. One more thing I did want to add today from Garnet Trust. They have a partnership, with Billy G's Carolina Barbecue. If you've not had the sweet heat sauce, it's fantastic. The Carolina Gold mustard based is good. The rub is really good. So if you buy stuff from Billy G's, you can. It's part of it goes to Garnet Trust to support NIL at South Carolina. A lot of good things happening on that front around South Carolina. And we know that during the off season for all sports, that's important. You got to have the money to compete. So check it out at Billy G's Barbecue and support Garnet Trust to get some delicious, delicious barbecue sauce and rub. So to Saturday night's game, I listened to Shane Beamer talk yesterday, and obviously it's the start of this gauntlet. But, I've listened to some other coaches around the SEC. Brian Kelly used the word gauntlet. Alabama fans are beside themselves that their schedule is setting up like it is. And there's a lot of reasons why. The first reason is I've said this before. It's not so much that Texas and Oklahoma are in the league and are these dominating teams. Obviously, as Texas is finding out this year and Oklahoma found out last year, it's not the Big 12. But what it's done when you go to and then 9 games next year, you go to that type of scheduling and it's kind of randomized. You throw in NIL in the transfer portal. And Joel Klatt was talking about this on Fox, and he's right. The amount of talent that you're able to stockpile at a given program, no matter who you are, is limited compared to how it used to be because guys aren't playing. They just go somewhere else they can play, and everybody's got money to a certain extent. And I'll use Damon Wilson as an example. He was starting at Georgia, but he's more of a 4-3 end. Wanted to go into a system where maybe he could get a little more sack numbers. Georgia, of course, their ends don't always pile up the sack numbers. They're good at pressuring and obviously a great defense. But, so he's at Missouri now. Normally, though, he would just be at Georgia, because he wouldn't want to sit out a year. You have, Carolina's got several guys that were at Alabama. Justin Okoronkwo is one of them. that was there, Monkel Goodwin. So two starters that used to started off their career at the University of Alabama. And that kind of evens the playing field a bit. And Brian Kelly was talking about it in SEC play these days. If you don't show up on a given weekend, you can get beat. A lot of, like I mentioned, the NFL style scores that have been taking place around the league again. It hangs in the balance because there's not this overwhelming talent advantage. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some teams that are better than others. But when Vanderbilt is able to put that roster together that they've got and win games, and you got what's going on at Missouri. They play Alabama this weekend. And, you let's look around the league. If Florida didn't get off to a good start, but then they beat Texas. I mean, it is a gauntlet. So Carolina's not alone. And Shane, I know a lot of people are making a big deal out of what's coming up based on the rankings right now, but those rankings are going to change. And everybody's situation can be different. You look at it now, and I don't expect Carolina to be favored in any of these games coming up right now, but it can change. And so that's how you got to look at it. That's just life in the SEC. You look at Clemson's schedule coming up, and they got some games. Sure, Louisville on a Friday night, Florida State, SMU. They could probably lose, but they may not if they play well. But they got North Carolina, Boston College. Um, and that's life. I mean, that's how it's always been with Clemson and South Carolina, and everybody else in the ACC, including Miami, which looks like the best team in the country. Ohio State opened with Texas, and everybody ranks them number one. Well, we haven't even heard much about them. Not in the SEC, man. It was, and this weekend's crazy. I mean, you got Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, Missouri, Carolina, LSU, Florida. Florida turns around and goes to Texas A&M after that game with Texas last week. Texas and Texas A&M. But how about that? Even Arkansas with Bobby Petrino going up there to Tennessee. They beat Tennessee last year. I mean, it's serious stuff. And so the good news for South Carolina with all that is the Gamecocks are not at this, talent disadvantage. Even during the Spurrier years, Carolina's top guys were just as good as anybody in the league, but there wasn't a lot of depth. Well, now nobody really has depth. And then it's a game of attrition with injuries and people that are going to be out. So, I agree with Beamer. If you didn't want to play this schedule and compete against the best teams in the country, don't come to South Carolina and don't come to the SEC because that's just how it is. Now, he benched one game at a time too, and I think that's smart. You can't get ahead of yourself, and you got to get up each and every week for these because you'll get your butt beat if you don't, and you may get your butt beat even if you do get up because there's some teams that are awfully good. And Saturday night, this LSU defense is very, very good. And again, along the lines of it's going to be this way. Oklahoma's good on defense. Alabama's good on defense. Ole Miss and Texas A&M are coming on defense. They've gotten better. Ole Miss last week defensively was really good against LSU. Although LSU's offense, there were certainly some question marks there. Um, so it's just life. You're going to have to find a way to score points this weekend. We talked yesterday about the defense sort of locking in. Yeah, and I honestly believe Carolina's going to have to play a very, very good game defensively. You can't lapse and play like you did against Missouri or Vanderbilt and have any chance to win the game. But offensively, that's going to be it's kind of a sore subject right now around Gamecock land, but it is a subject. It's kind of a mystery to me why they're not better, to be honest. We can talk about the reasons for that. It's just been one of those things where I've been sort of surprised, to be honest, with kind of the plan of attack. The in some games, the I don't want to say necessarily play calling, but the sequence of it. Run, pass. I don't know that that gets you very far. The stubbornness with running the football in certain games. Mostly the wins with that. Carolina aired it out pretty good against Missouri and Vandy, but the blocking issues and the penalties and all the mistakes, very surprising. You expect some at the beginning of the year, but not like this, and not like it's been. Now, to their credit, they cleaned it up a little bit against Kentucky. Limited penalties. Uh, the blocking was better. Lenora Sellers got out, ran for a season high 81 yards. Kentucky's not a very good defense. That's the one defense that you look at, and they're not stopping people. They just don't have the talent that they normally do defensively up there. Well coached and all that. So you don't really take a whole lot away from that Kentucky game, and really the offense only scored 21 points because the defense got two touchdowns. And statistically, like I pointed out yesterday, the non-offensive touchdowns do impact your like total offensive numbers and plays run and things like that because it's back-to-back possessions for the other offense. But it's going to be a big challenge to get points Saturday night, especially if things don't change. I mean, look, prepare yourself if things do not get better significantly with the offense. Carolina may not score. I mean, that's just facts. I'm not trying to be negative here. This LSU defense is better than any defense they've played by a good margin. They're better than Vanderbilt. They're better on the back end than Missouri, and they've got an equal front, in my opinion. They're certainly better than Virginia Tech, South Carolina State, and Kentucky. So this is the biggest challenge that this offense has faced this year. And so you hope that they fix some things because they're capable. It's not like Lenora Sellers isn't a great player anymore. He is, and he can make a difference in just about any defense you play. Anybody you play, if Lenore Sellers is on, he's a problem for a lot of teams. And so that's going to be the big key. This is the problem. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I can't think of a tougher environment Lenore Sellers has played a game in. Last year, what were the big crowds on the road? Alabama was a noon kickoff. It was loud down there. Kentucky was loud at the beginning, obviously. I mean, he's played on the road, don't get me wrong, but a Saturday night in Baton Rouge is a different animal altogether. I mean, Clemson was a big crowd, loud crowd, start to finish. He obviously performed extremely well in that environment. But this Saturday night in Baton Rouge is totally, it's next level. Been there a few times. I guess last time I went was 2012. For that game, the Gamecocks got beat. They were Gamecocks were third in the country. LSU was ninth. LSU lined up and ran the ball all over Carolina's defense and didn't quite get enough offense there. Lost 23-21. That was the first loss of that season for Carolina. So it's a challenge, and not many teams outside of Alabama for some reason. If you look at the history of the Alabama LSU series, the Crimson Tide have, as a program, no matter who the coach has been, they've sort of solved the mystery of playing down there on a Saturday night. But that's it. The rest of the teams usually struggle big time down there. And when LSU is good on defense, it makes it even harder because, how do you get the crowd out of the game? You score points. It's deflating when you look up at the scoreboard and you're a fan and your team's losing. You're less likely to be into it. And so that's the deal. And Lenore Sellers, he hadn't played anywhere like this, so it's kind of concerning in a lot of ways. Carolina, Beamer was asking the press conference yesterday about what's his definition of balance on offense, and he made a good point. He said, well, to me, it's not necessarily being 50-50. It's, what's the defense playing? Are you going to have to throw it? Are you going to have to run it? But being able to do both of those things efficiently. And I agree with that philosophically. I don't know that we've always seen it. I don't think that Carolina is going to be able to line up and run it just kind of the normal way with these guys. I think that it'd be great if they could, but I just don't know that the offensive line, the running backs, and the run game in general can make that kind of progress during an open week, especially against a really good defensive front. So this is a big, big challenge, for South Carolina to score points. I think the defense, as long as they lock in, given LSU struggles on offense, I think in theory that's a good matchup for Carolina. Carolina's D line against their O line in particular, but you got to score to win, right? You can't count on defensive scores and special team scores. If they happen, great, but that's not something that statistically, when you're just talking about probability, that always happens. So, here's the good news. And I mentioned Lenore Sellers, and this is going to be the toughest environment he's ever played in, but he's still Lenore Sellers. So, uh, Steve Spurrier, many other coaches have said this: big time players make big time plays in big time games. Now he's going to have help. He can't carry the whole thing by himself. But as we know, that's but he is an X factor and a difference maker. And if you look at their game against Ole Miss, Trinidad Chambliss, dual threat quarterback, he threw for over 300 yards and had 71 on the ground. So now that's Lane Kiffin and his offense. But South Carolina's got some good receivers. This is by the way, also on the second, it's the best secondary they've played. So they're the receivers have a challenge this week. But they did give up some yards and some points against the Rebels on the road, and did not necessarily contain Chambliss as well as I think they probably could have. Now, Lenore Sellers has their attention. When he went out of the game last year, I think he had 143 yards rushing, including a 75-yard touchdown. Brian Kelly mentions it, that they're going to have to do something to counter him. He also mentioned Dylan Stewart and doing something to counter him. So Carolina's two star players do have their attention. And you hope kind of maybe there's a little coaching arrogance and they do all this work to, I guess, try to contain Lenoris and try to stop Dylan, and the rest of the guys have big opportunities to make plays. And that's what you hope for in the football game, if they're successful doing that. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. What does Carolina need to do to move the football? Well, yeah, I have my opinions, obviously. I still think getting people out of the box is important. I don't think you're going to be able to line up and run 9 minutes off the clock against these guys, and I don't know that that's necessarily the plan. I think Matthew Fuller, with the way he can get positive yardage, is a player that I think would probably play more. Um, he's a young back, but he kind of helps you stay out of those, um, behind the sticks, lost yardage plays. I think because he falls forward, runs for tough yards, that kind of thing. So, if I'm looking at somebody to maybe come in and help move things along, it would probably be Matthew Fuller. It's like Ben Briner talked about yesterday on the show, just a little bit better. If you're looking at letter grades, let's say the blocking's a C minus. If you can get to a C plus, and a 2 or 3 yard gain turns into 4 or 5, that puts you in an infinitely better spot. I think they're gonna have to throw on first down some. You can't be predictable against this bunch. We've seen very little misdirection and things like that in this year. It's not such a bad idea. Getting Lenore Sellers out of the pocket is a good idea, I think, because he can kind of create with his legs and keeping his eyes downfield, throwing the ball. That kind of stuff is really, I think, what sets Lenore Sellers apart. I don't know that it's realistic to go in there and expect a clean pocket, drop back, chunk it down the field against his secondary and against his pass rush and guys like Harold Perkins. I mean, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. So, JC, where's the hope? Give us some hope. Well, the hope is that the offensive line, which I feel like, I don't know this for sure, but nobody's asked anybody about it so far this week. I feel like they'll go with what they went with in the second half, and we'll get an injury report, availability report tonight. Case in Henry, who knows if he'll start? Maybe it's Shivers, maybe it's Henry, but I think Tree is going to start at left tackle. That would be my opinion because I thought that offensive line played as well as any of the combinations collectively this year. Were they perfect? No. Did they make mistakes? Yes. Were they what I would call good? No. I would call it probably decent. But sometimes decent's better than liability, right? So sometimes we've seen seasons around here before where, and Ben mentioned it yesterday. By the way, the Ben Briner interview is up on our YouTube channel, cut commercial free if you want to go listen to it. And he said, Shane's first year when they put Tyshawn Wanamaker in at tackle and they had, I guess, Jalen Nichols, some other guy, they kind of solidified that group and they were able to kind of, when the offensive coordinator had a good game plan, they were able to run the ball at times and hold up. So sometimes, and we saw it during the Spurrier era too, when, the first few years, every year they would start off with just a garbage offensive line. And inevitably there would be personnel changes and guys getting in. Sometimes it was guys from out of nowhere. Sometimes it was Thomas Coleman, a walk on, Seth Edwards, a walk on. Sometimes it was Justin Sorensen, who nobody thought was ever going to play. He was a 3-year starter for the Gamecocks. Until Eric Wolford got to Carolina in 09 and then Sean Elliott, because Wolf left and went and took the Youngstown State job. Sean Elliott took over in 2010. Until those guys got there, it was like that every single season when Steve Spurrier was the coach, and they would just get better. Now the Wolford and Elliott kind of had it going from the start, as far as who was in and who was not. But even the year Carolina won the SEC East, Garrett Chisholm, a walk-on, was starting at guard at the end. So guys kind of came out of nowhere during that era, and they ended up offensive line ended up solidifying, and all of a sudden they're able to run the ball. Pretty good football team. So, and that's kind of what you hope for here, is that a new group is actually better. I mean, like listening to Hale McGranahan last week, he was talking about how, a lot of folks are like, well, why didn't you start him to begin with? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. The first reason is maybe they weren't as good and maybe they weren't ready. Players get better during the season, and sometimes guys get worse. There was talk about why Boaz Stanley was starting. I don't know that you could see those kind of catastrophic breakdowns coming from him, especially if my understanding is he practices really well. It's just games. Some guys can't handle that, and I'm not saying he can't ever. I'm saying maybe he wasn't as ready and it was a big surprise, and that's the center and all that. So maybe Rodney Newsome or Nolan Hay comes in and kind of solidifies things. If your center can't communicate and your center's making mistakes, it's not going to be pretty no matter how well anybody else is playing. So you hope a new center can help. Communication is going to be very difficult in this environment. I hope they're working on some silent snap counts and things like that. You got to be able to communicate because you're not going to be able to hear. And that's, this place is loud. If you've never been there, it is loud and big. It's the probably the best environment in college football. I mean, people hype up the Penn State whiteout, and Williams Brice gets a lot of deserved accolades, and there's a lot of loud stadiums, but LSU at night, it's next level decibel wise. The crowd's right on top of you. They're fired up beyond all belief. I mean, it's a special environment. And so the offensive line's got to communicate. So where's the hope? The hope is some new guys in there handle the environment, weather the storm, and that they're better than the guys they were playing. And thus it makes your offensive line a little bit better. I mean, LSU is going to be a handful to block regardless, but there's the hope. The hope is to Matthew Fuller, um, and the other backs, Rasul Faison, Oscar Attaway, whoever else plays. The hope is that those guys hit the holes a little better, make a little better decisions with the football. Um, I think Faison does that from time to time. His stats won't tell you that, but the 2 touchdown runs he had were great. Followed his blocks, got in the end zone. He's good enough to make things happen. The hope is that the receivers can get open. Vendrevius Jacobs needs to continue to be productive. So does Nick Harbor. That gives you hope. I mean, these guys have proven they can make plays. I think it's a much improved group collectively. And Vendrevius needs to continue to make plays, especially down the field after the last 2 games. His production is going to be very, very important. And Vendrevious isn't going to be intimidated by, these guys probably won't be intimidated by this environment. It's just a lot different than maybe what they faced before. Tight end, there was some bad news yesterday, in my opinion. Michael Smith leaves the program. He's going to get in the transfer portal. I can't say I'm shocked by that. There's something, yeah, I haven't got like any details on it, but for some reason, I mean, he missed the spring, and then for some reason, like he's not playing a whole lot. Beamer mentions practice matters. He was out. I don't know what was going on there, but it's unfortunate because he's an awfully talented player, and I think that's probably, if you're talking about individual players being a disappointment this year, that's probably the biggest one because he has the talent to be quite good. Don't know where he'll end up, but if he gets a fresh start somewhere, I don't think you've heard the last of Michael Smith, but that's that's a promising young player at tight end. And I'm not going to say it hurts the room, but you know, I think we were all kind of hoping he would come along. And so now, no, not going to happen. That position in general has to block better on the perimeter. There's just no question about it. People want to know, we talk about the offense being very restrictive and a lot between the tackles and in the middle of the field. Well, when they try to go outside, as Ben pointed out, and it's not just Brian Rowe, who's 170 pounds and a freshman. How I don't know it's realistic to ask him to get out there and block some of these grown men he's playing against right now with any efficiency. I mean, he tries, but it's the tight ends olaying out there and stuff. I mean, Ben pointed it out. Brady Hunt's uh, had a couple, Jordan Dingle, all that. I don't know that I wouldn't go with Maurice Brown a little more if I'm Sean Elliott and those guys. That's up to them. Just because he is a willing blocker, he's a very physical player. He's explosive enough. He is kind of more of a fullback type, H-back type, but it doesn't matter. You just got to get it done. I mean, you can't just sit there and every time you go outside, it gets blown all to hell because you can't. But that's why they haven't been going outside, and it's gotten blown up because you really got to, you got to spring that block out on the perimeter, and then on the wide receiver screens and stuff, and then they go. So I don't know that that's a play calling issue as much as it may be a smart play calling issue because you don't want to go out there because you're going to lose 3 yards because you're not executing it. That's got to come along too. I think receiving wise, obviously any kind of yards you can get if it's involving the tight ends or the backs, I think that's fine. So the hope is maybe some new players out there can get it going. And then the hope is also with Lenora Sellers. I mean, he's going to have to play one of his best games. I think he'll have to play the best he's played all season, which has been pretty good. Like, look, folks around the country, Lenora Sellers is disappointing. They haven't really looked into what he's actually done. There's some games Maybe you want him to run a little more, but I mean, like Missouri, he had that statement that they knew what was coming. That's not really on him. He did all he could, three for 302 yards in that one. Probably the worst he's played would be the start of the South Carolina State game. And in that one, after they were backed up early, once they opened it up in the second half, opened up the offense, he was fine. So I think Sellers has played pretty good. The numbers, aren't there. But I don't think I mean, look, last year, Lenora Sellers, just to remind everybody, turned the ball over a whole lot. Not so much interceptions, but fumbles and stuff. And knock on wood, Carolina, when he's been at quarterback this year, he had the one interception against Vandy. It was costly. It was costly. But then he got knocked out of the game, and who knows if he'd have stayed. After watching Vandy against Bama, if Sellers stays in the game against Vandy, I don't know that we. Well, I mean, I think first of all, it's going to be a lot closer of a football game. Second, yeah, I don't know that Carolina doesn't win. I mean, you put your backup quarterback in, and you turn it over three more times, and you're moving the ball, but you keep turning it over and can't score, you're going to lose to anybody within reason. So, you know, I say that Lenore Sellers has to play his best game on Saturday night, admitting that I think he's played pretty good. The Kentucky game, the numbers don't pop out at you. He only attempted 14 passes, but he completed 11 of them and rushed for a season high 81 yards and looked more like Lenore Sellers with some of the plays he makes. And there's going to be times he's going to have to escape pressure, get yardage, do whatever. That's going to be very important. I think when you're talking about if you're going to have any chance to win on Saturday night and put the points on the board needed to win. But there's a lot of hope in number 16. I think that people that get, you know, sometimes the quarterback gets unfairly blamed. I think, that's probably not fair with him. You have to, any quarterback needs a supporting cast. But if he goes down there and plays his best game, then Carolina certainly has a shot. What do they need to do? I still think spread the field, operate at a brisk tempo, mix it up on first and second down, play calling wise. You can't run, pass, I think will be a disaster just because it's predictable. You got to be a little unpredictable with this one. Not necessarily trick plays and things like that, but just uh, I you get back to the first drive of the year, or some of the opening drives Carolina's had this season, really in just about every game. That do that the whole game would be my thought against against this bunch. I mean, it's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. But you go out there and execute and do well. That's the deal. LSU's defense has forced some turnovers this year. Obviously, Carolina has not turned it over a lot with Sellers in the game. Carolina's defense has been getting turnovers. I think the turnover battle will be important, provided, unless LSU just shuts Carolina completely down or vice versa. The turnover battle will probably determine this football game, and it's hard not to turn it over down there. DJ Lagway from Florida went down there and threw five picks and a pick six, and LSU didn't capitalize with their offense. So, who knows what they'll look like on offense this Saturday night. Uh, we talked about what Carolina's defense needed to do yesterday. The offense we're talking about today. Carolina has to find a way to put points on the board by any means necessary. This is not a game where I think you can go down and be stubborn with anything, throwing it, passing it, doing whatever. I mean, you just gotta call the right plays, execute the right plays against the right defense. And don't mess up. No turnovers, no drop passes, things like that tend to rear their early ugly head in a challenging environment. LSU's a 9.5 point favorite. I think that sounds about right for the game. Beamer, though, during his career at South Carolina, when they've been kind of 9-ish point underdogs, that Carolina's had some success in surprising some teams. I believe that was the line at Kentucky last season. So, you never know. Beamer's done a really good job at South Carolina with reversing trends, I guess. I mean, I don't guess. I know. Carolina had never beaten A&M before Beamer got here, and he's beaten them twice. They had a long losing streak against Clemson. He's beaten Clemson twice. They had some issues against Kentucky, 7 of 8, 6 of 7, something like that. Well, he's beaten them 4 times in a row. Lost the Vanderbilt streak. Did not start a streak against Missouri after winning last year, but he did beat Missouri last year. Auburn was a team Carolina had beaten once, and that was during a pandemic year. Beamer beat him again. He had a losing streak against Florida his first year that they won. Losing streak in bowl games, and they beat North Carolina. So it's been one of those things, where he's been able to do the unexpected, and against a team that all time you're 2-20-1 against, that you've beaten once in the SEC, and that was in 1994 when their program was in the wilderness by 1 point, also on a Saturday night in Baton Rouge. Maybe you reverse that trend this year. LSU is kind of the one team Carolina hadn't been able to figure out at all. It was probably A&M there for a while until 2022, but the Gamecocks have just not. It hasn't mattered how good Carolina's been, how good LSU's been, bad LSU's been, whatever. They haven't been bad very often, but South Carolina's just not done all that well. Now, since 2002, when Carolina went down and had a 14-3 lead in the first half in Baton Rouge Saturday night, Nick Saban was the coach there. It was a year before he won the national championship. Then the second half, LSU just blew them out. I think they scored 35 straight points, and that kind of started it all. There was the 07 and 08 matchups with Les Miles that were closer but didn't go the Gamecocks' way. We've talked about the 2012 matchup, which was very disappointing and costly. Then the weird deal in 2015 when they went down there, that was Steve Spurrier's last game as the head coach at Carolina. That was 45-24. And then 2020 was just bizarre. LSU won 52-24. Carolina, their offense in that game, and see, nobody played defense that year, averaged 7.9 yards per play and got beat by 28. Crazy. That was like the beginning. That was at that point in 2020, the wheels came off of the Muschamp era, because Carolina was 2-2 at the time with a tough, ridiculous 4-point loss to Tennessee in the opener, a loss to a good Florida team on the road where they were competitive. Then they beat Vanderbilt, and they came back and beat Auburn. So they're 2-2. They're going to LSU. LSU struggled all year, giving up a lot of points. And my LSU friends were like, they expected Carolina to come in there and win. And they just got blown away. Then they got blown away by A&M the next week. And then they lost to Ole Miss in the clipboard game. And that was it. That was the end of the Muschamp era. So a lot of weird stuff has happened. And then, of course, there's last year's LSU game. My goodness, that was a tough loss. It was a tough loss at the time. And then as the season went on, it was just extremely frustrating. But Shane Beamer, to his credit, he's turned some things around here. He's reversed some trends, and it wouldn't. I don't think it would surprise very many people at all if Carolina went in there and won. I think it would surprise everybody based on what we know now. This football team is, and this football team's this way. LSU has its warts. I still think they have an advantage being at home and at night. If it were in Columbia, well, maybe it would have a different opinion. But records and stuff like that were made to be broken. Streaks were meant to be snapped. You can ask Vanderbilt about that. And so now is as good a time as any, right? I just kind of threw 3 cliches at you to end things. Don't forget, the morning show is coming up with a terrific trio of guests: Stephen Garcia, Rob Williams, Whittle on all things, Wide Open Wednesday on the show, Sports Talk, the late night Gamecock show tonight. And don't forget Smorgasbord with Alex Jones on the show tomorrow. Also, Tailgate Talks. Check that out. Download the Chief Sports app. Please like, subscribe, and share if you're on YouTube. Go to our podcast channel on Apple. Rate us 5 stars if you're listening that way. And this has been Coffee with JC Sherbert. Have a great Wednesday, everyone. Holla.
JC and Mad Dog Mully.